This documentary concerns the Native American Church and its use of the sacred sacrament, peyote. All efforts have been made in the making of this program to pay proper respects to this sacrament and this way of worship. The program contains scenes of drumming and singing sessions with members of the Native American Church. Although these scenes depict what a Native American church ceremony looks like, they are not actual peyote meetings. Out of respect, no ceremonies were interrupted for recording. For thousands of years, the indigenous people of North America have been making long pilgrimages to gather a cactus plant they believe is holy medicine, placed here on earth by God to heal them and give them spiritual guidance. Devout prayers, rhythmic drumming, and the sacramental use of peyote are at the heart of ancient ceremonies that celebrate a way of life regarded as the Peyote Road.
The way the old folks say, well, when you got through, it's like the creator was an artist. He gathered things and made all of this, set it up, and there's nobody around to enjoy it, nobody around to see it. So he put man on this earth. So our people, when they began to live, they found themselves living in a very strange and mysterious surroundings. So in their thinking, well, they thought, somebody made this. Whoever it is, whatever it is, a force, terrific force or spirit. So they decided it must be a great spirit that did this, created all of this. So one of the major things they started to do was to give thanks, pray. And they realized that their very existence depended on what nature had in store for them. The Creator put little extra in this medicine. When the white man invaded or landed on this continent, just like he said, my children's going to need help. They're going to need something so they could kind of understand.
Some time ago, years back, generations back, this one lady had been traveling to her peoples, and she was very thirsty and hungry, and according to what they tell us, she was very tired and she fell asleep along the way. And when she fell asleep, why, she dreamt of this voice came to her and told her that when she gets up and to pick up this one herb that's on the ground and to eat that, and that would keep her from being hungry and thirsty. And she saw what this herb looked like in her dream. So when she woke up, why, she seen the herb there on the ground, so she picked it up and she used it. And she returned this medicine, as we so call it, took her back to her peoples, guided her back through prayer. When she partook of the medicine, she prayed and she found her way back to her peoples, and from there the relatives came with her and picked the medicine and used it.
So it seemed like it was time, guided by some good spirit, and this woman found this medicine commonly known as peyote. And then that's when the development started. Now, like I said, our people got it and developed it into a beautiful ceremony.
Freedom of religious belief and practice is a precious heritage, one of the principles upon which the United States was founded. But a recent Supreme Court decision has sent shockwaves through religious communities around the country. decision of devastating impact to the Free Exercise Clause of the United States Constitution, the 1990 Smith case, the United States Supreme Court denied protection of First Amendment religious liberty to the sacramental use of peyote for Native Americans, one of the oldest tribal religions in the Western Hemisphere. In 1984, Al Smith, a member of the Klamath tribe and a counselor at a substance abuse and rehabilitation program in Oregon, was given an ultimatum by his employer about his participation in the Native American church.
They called me into the office on Friday, and because I told them that I would be going to a teepee meeting. They called me and asked me if I attended that meeting, that I was not to ingest this mind-altering drug, peyote, and again, I tried to explain to him. I says it's not a drug, you know. For Native people, for members of the Native American Church, it's a very, very sacred sacrament. They called me in the office Monday and asked me if I had attended a Native American church ceremony, and I says I did. And they asked me if I ingested that mind-altering drug, peyote, and I says no. I says, but I did take the sacrament, sacred sacrament. I says, and they says, well, you leave us no alternative, but we have to terminate you, you know. So it's always been a misunderstanding of cultures, a misunderstanding of definitions. It's been a language misunderstanding.
Smith's application for unemployment benefits was initially denied by the state of Oregon. So he turned to the Oregon Court of Appeals, which reversed the decision, citing the federal exemption for sacramental wine during Prohibition. The Oregon Supreme Court upheld Smith's claim on the basis of freedom of religion. However, the United States Supreme Court abandoned decades of precedent on First Amendment law and ruled that the Constitution does not protect the sacramental use of peyote, even in the context of a religious tradition far older than the Constitution itself.
Justice Scalia held that it too strictly protected the religious rights of American citizens, and that our society just simply could not withstand this test because we had too much religious diversity. And the underlying rationale for discarding the First Amendment test was very disturbing, and that is that America's religious diversity is a luxury, in the words of the court, that our American democracy cannot afford.
So essentially what you have here is a situation where these people are having to practice their religion fearful of a knock on the door. And that simply is not right. It's certainly not right in America. And it's certainly not right in relation to a religious way of life that has been on this continent for millennia before this country was even created.
Native American leaders across the country immediately recognized the implications of the Smith decision and declared a state of cultural emergency. Led by Reuben Snake of the Nebraska Winnebago tribe, a coalition on the peyote issue was formed to appeal to Senate leaders for a series of congressional hearings on the crisis in religious freedom for Native Americans. Senator Daniel Inouye agreed to hold the first of the hearings in Portland, Oregon in the spring of 1992.
Right to freely exercise our religion is a right that millions have sacrificed their lives for. It is a right that is so fundamental to our way of life. No matter whether we are Christian, Jew, or Buddhist, or Muslim, should any of our religious practices be threatened, we join together in defense of our right to exercise our religious belief, except perhaps when it comes to the religious practices of the native people of this country. These are the religious practices that are little understood and which in recent years the rulings of courts have systematically undermined. We should all feel threatened when the religious rights of Native people are challenged. For today it may be their rights, someone else's religious rights that are discouraged. But tomorrow it may well be ours.
In 1952, the President of these United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower, said these words: "Whatever America desires for the world must first come to pass in the heart of America." And today, our national leaders, our President, and members of his administration, the Secretary of State, they travel to the four corners of the globe professing support of human rights in all the different nations of the world. They say, live up to your teachings and protect the human rights of people. And while they're doing that, here within this country, the indigenous people of this land continue to suffer these gross injustices and deprivation of our religious freedom. So in closing, I want to say, Senator, quoting Edmund Burke, that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing.
Peyote is a spineless cactus plant that grows along the Rio Grande River Valley in Texas and northern Mexico. After being used by tribal people for centuries for a wide range of purposes, from healing to divination, today it continues to be a sacrament in a set of profound religious ceremonies among many tribes throughout the United States, Mexico, and Canada.
The roots of this religion go way, way back into the Indians of the Central and South America. How long? Well, longer than historians are able to determine. Probably we're talking about maybe 40 or 50,000 years. And so the first question that the historian of religion raises, the time test, by this criterion, the Native American church has a solid grounding which makes historians of religion intensely interested in it and viewing it as an authentic, bona fide religious tradition of humanity.
Antes lo liviana uno. Si tú pides un trabajo, otras cosas más, quieres saber y te lo da para caminar más bien, saber más bien. El peyote ese no es dañoso, ese es bueno, ese da el corazón muy bien, a pensar todo bien, para tener más fuerza, para subir más arriba. Ese, para eso está nomás, no para otras cosas. No, así como dicen, ese no es droga.
The Huichol Indians have been using peyote. They collected it during a long journey of about a month on foot, and then the return trip. The Huichol believe that the peyote is the heart of the Creator, that this was given to them in order to help them understand how they should relate to the world that they live in, how they should maintain harmony in that world, so that the medicine is approached with a reverence. Offerings are made before the peyote is cut. And all of this is done out of respect for the Creator and the heart of the Creator that they're going to ingest.
While many of the old ways were being outlawed and destroyed by the white man, the ancient practice of peyote became a more profound source of spiritual strength than ever before, offering hope and faith for an uncertain future. At the center of many stories of the rapid diffusion of the medicine is one of the most powerful spiritual leaders of the day, the Comanche, Quanah Parker. According to legend, on one of the Comanche October moon raids into southern Texas, Quanah was gored by a bull and healed by a Lipan Apache curandera, a medicine woman who treated him with her people's traditional herb.
Many of the elements that I saw with the Huichol are carried over into the Native American church. The Carrizo Indians lived in the area from Laredo, Texas to the Gulf of Mexico, right along the Rio Grande, the border between Mexico and the United States. And they did have a pre-Columbian way of using the medicine. This way was evidently taught to the Lipan Apache, who also lived in that southern part of Texas near the Carrizo. The Lipan Apache then transformed the rite and carried it on to the Kiowa Apache, the Kiowa, and the Comanche. And the Comanche, particularly because of people like Quanah Parker, rapidly shared that ceremony with their tribes to the north of them. And it just spread like wildfire after 1880 when the railroad connected Laredo, Texas with Indian Territory, Oklahoma.
Despite the unifying influence of the peyote meetings, soon there was violent opposition from missionaries, Indian agents, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
The early explorers and settlers viewed the tribal people through ethnocentric eyes and failed to realize that the tribes had ancient religious beliefs and practices that they were observing. And I think it's very ironic that the first settlers that came to these shores are ones who came in search of religious freedom, but yet they did not apply those same values to the indigenous populations that were already here.
The expansionist policies of the early United States government inevitably worked to suppress tribal religious practices.
And this included federal statutes, for example, that conveyed Indian land to missionary groups for church work amongst the Indians, to Christianize the Indians. The government, in addition, would also appoint routinely missionary groups as Indian agents that were in charge of entire Indian nations or Indian reservations to further assist as the government representative in separating Indians from their way of life and making them into Christian farmers, basically. That policy in the 1890s, after the tribes were placed onto Indian reservations, took a darker turn when the government acted to stamp out by military force, for example, the ghost dance religion, the slaughter of ghost dancers at Wounded Knee, the arrest of ghost dance leaders on other reservations. And ultimately, in 1894, the Bureau of Indian Affairs did a complete ban on tribal religions, which resulted in incarceration, denial of rations for engaging in tribal religious ceremonies.
The United States government policy of outlawing all Native American religious practices was a tragic contradiction of another official government policy known as the Trust Doctrine, in which the United States declared its responsibility to preserve and protect Native American culture and sovereignty.
But, as my clients tell me so often, sovereignty does not mean much. It rings hollow if you do not have an intact culture to protect and to enjoy.
Ever since their first contact with the indigenous people of the New World, European immigrants have found Indian religions strange and often terrifying. Once peyote use was discovered among tribes of the Great Plains, zealous missionaries began agitating. As early as 1897, anti-peyote groups attempted to pass a Prohibition Act. Quanah Parker led a delegation of Peyote Road men and medical experts to Oklahoma City in 1907 to establish the legal status of peyote in Oklahoma. Repeated efforts to include peyote among the narcotics suppressed by the Indian Appropriation Bill convinced many that the freedom of Native Americans to practice their sovereign religion would have to be fought for. Albert Hensley, a Winnebago roadman, eloquently defended peyote practice. James Mooney, an anthropologist from the Smithsonian Institution, led a successful defense in the Intertribal Conference of 1918 and worked with members of various Oklahoma tribes to establish a peyote church. In the early 1900s, anthropologists from the Smithsonian Institution chose the Oto Misuria Reservation at Red Rock, Oklahoma, to attend a Native American church gathering. The elders of the reservation chose Charlie Whitehorn to conduct the meeting.
And they told him, grandfather, you're the one that's in charge tonight. You're our prayer chief. They believed that this peyote cult could possibly be banned and outlawed, just the way that the ghost dance was. The anthropologists liked what they saw and what they heard, and the Peyote Road promoted family stability, and in there was sobriety and self-sufficiency, and also brotherly love.
After the era of forced settlement of many tribes to Indian and Oklahoma territory, the use of peyote was formalized into structured ceremonies combining Indian and Christian concepts. 100 years later, there are about 300,000 members of the Native American Church, representing approximately 70 tribes, who gather regularly to sing, drum, pray, meditate, and consume the sacrament of peyote during all-night ceremonies. According to tradition, a peyote meeting is initiated by a sponsor who presents the road band with sacred tobacco.
Oh, Johnny and Reuben, I want to ask that we can have a meeting to pray for our people. And I was always taught that this fireplace and the peyote ceremonies is a good thing. It's good medicine. It's to help heal our people. I want to conduct a meeting like this. I want our minds together to conduct a meeting and have everybody in our meeting benefiting from that, going home and seeing their kids and realizing that everything that they do to their kids, the kids are going to grow up and do it to their kids. And if they realize that they go home and treat their kids nice, when they have kids, they're going to treat their kids nice. And that's how we start healing our generations down the road, you know. So at this time, I want to present the tobacco to you.
My uncle, Gordon Thunder, told us that when we put up a teepee, make everything as neat and as perfect as we can get it, because we're making it all look and appear presentable unto the Lord. Because we're going to come in here and we're going to pray and ask God for life, especially for our children. So we want that good spirit to stay among us. And when everything is nice and neat, they say there is a place for everything and everything should be in its place. So we put the teepee up just as perfect as we can. Tie the drum just so, where the hide sits on there just perfectly around. It's not lopsided. The fan makers use the smallest beads, the cut beads, meticulously put together in fine, minute detail, the best colors, rainbow colors. And then the designs, they all mean something to us. And when they're put on, they're prayed about in such a way that when the finished product comes out, it's a work of love, because we love this way of life. We love our relatives. Whoever's going to be using it and praying with it, they're going to pray for us in return. So we do our very, very best. In referring to the instruments that was given to us by the Creator in this way of life, first of all, we have what we call the staff of life. Some of these staffs are fashioned in the form of a spear or a lance that we would use on the buffalo hunt. And then some of those are fashioned in the form of a bow that we would use with the bow and arrow. And we would take that out into the wilderness to provide for our family. At the same time, it would provide protection for our villages. So in here, when we use it and we send it around and we sing with it, we're looking for something good, and we're looking for protection, for good life for our children and our families. And in there, we'd have a feather, an eagle feather, a water bird. Each one of these feathers have a story to it. And then there is a gourd. Some say peyote rattle, but we call it a gourd. In the scriptures, the 23rd Psalm, it says, all the days of my life I will fear no evil, for thy rod and thy staff comfort me. So to us, the staff of life, the rod is the gourd. We have these instruments, and then we have our water drum, and sing these songs. That is going to be our comfort.
This crescent moon made out of the earth surrounded the fireplace. This symbol of this crescent moon is the road of life in this earthly plane. So we come out of the spirit world and we start down this road of life here in this earthly plane. The liturgy of our ceremonial life is learned early on in our lives. Each one of us, male and female, is taught how to do certain parts of the ceremonial life. And so we practice and we practice in our everyday life, you know, what it is to go out into the woods to find the right kind of wood to build a sacred fire, you know. Not just any old kind of wood will do. There has to be a certain kind of wood that we're going to use in order to build this sacred fire that is going to reveal God's will to us. Because the flames of this sacred fire is God's tongue talking to us. And so we sit in a circle around the light of this sacred fire, and we ingest this divine medicine, and we put our minds on this fireplace, and we raise our voices in song so that our minds become fused into one thought.
And when you're hearing the prayers in here, the purpose of the prayers, when you hear that in here, then you keep your mind that way. You keep your mind on that one thing throughout the night. There's going to be time in the morning for you to pray for yourself and your family, but you always do that last. You don't do that first. You think about everything else in here. That person that is offering that tobacco is asking for help, and that's the full purpose of why you're here.
The experience of peyote, the medicine, is one that anybody would remember all their lives. Your body starts to become initially tired, and then you are relaxed. Relaxed but suffering, because you sit up in a teepee for 10, 12 hours. And the entire evening becomes a matter of how you deal with the space around you and how your body sits. Which is to say, you learn by looking. And you watch, as I did, the way these old-timers sit as though they're at total peace and relaxed. And they hardly move it. Myself, I couldn't sit still. It's the learning of the ways from watching, and from listening and participating. You get very clear and contemplative. And the fire is what consumes your interest and attention. And that's where the ancient and the recent have come together. And the drum pushes it all toward the eastern sky.
That morning, my father called me and said, now you're going to carry the water in, and I want you to remember that when the women bring in the water, it blesses all life. Females bring life into this world. They're always the one to renew life. So this is the purpose of this water.
What my grandmother taught us as little children, every day when we wake up, we should get up out of our bed before the sun comes over the eastern horizon. We should stand outside our lodge and we should raise our hands to the Creator as the sun comes over the horizon and thank Him for the life that we have that day.
Yeah, I enjoy going to Native American ceremonies, the teepee prayer meetings, because the people there make me feel good. You know, they're all so healthy and so loving people. You know, and just being around them here, they just make a person feel good.
In 1965, peyote was added to the list of controlled substances in the Federal Drug Abuse Control Act. Significantly, by that time, there was sufficient awareness of the virtue of this religious way of life and its importance in Indian communities that an exemption was granted to Native Americans for bona fide religious use. Since that time, the Native American Church has enjoyed a mutually respectful working relationship with the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency. As Mecca is sacred to the Muslims and Jerusalem is sacred to the Jews and Christians, so the peyote gardens are sacred to the indigenous people who use peyote as a sacrament. When Texas outlawed peyote possession in 1967, the entire Native American church community was alarmed because the prohibition would endanger their sacred pilgrimages to the peyote gardens. In response, delegates from 19 tribal groups met in an effort to persuade the Texas legislature to amend its law. The state granted a religious exemption with the provision that peyote harvesters register with the state, keep records, and require proof that recipients are Indians who are bona fide members of the Native American Church. In 1945, Amada Cardenas became the first licensed peyotero, a legal harvester of peyote in Texas. Since then, more than 1,000 Native American church members from all over North America have visited her during their peyote pilgrimages.
It's quite a job to go get it. Because we have to walk and dig it, put it in the sack, put it in the truck. They asked me what it tastes. It's bitter. You like it, you don't eat it. It's quite bitter. No, maybe they don't like it. It's feeling good, feeling strong, open mind. It's good. There's nothing to worry about.
Back in '76, when I first went down to make my pilgrimage to the Peyote Gardens, I heard about Mrs. Cardenas before, you know, when we were small, that we was, in them days we was, she was shipping our medicine to us. But I think it would be better if we go down there and check, see where the medicine comes from. That's what my thoughts were. And when I got down there, I saw her house, I visited with her. She was a real good person. You know, hospitality was in her heart. Any church member that's making his pilgrimage down there is welcome to stay in her house. And what someone said was, I think that was pretty good. She was called a Peyote Road, you know, and I think that's a good name for her.
The people that comes around here, they use it. And I never see nothing wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
You can see more when someone is drinking.
Yeah.
But in these meetings, everything is quiet always. There are prayers and worshiping, everything goes just right. I never see nothing wrong with them people that comes here.
In spite of the cooperative relationship between the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and the Native American Church, individual states are not compelled to honor the religious freedom of Native American church members, despite the government's trust responsibility to protect and preserve Indian cultures. Since the Smith case ruling, each state is free to make its own laws. Native American church members who have lawfully acquired the peyote in Texas can still be arrested and prosecuted in states they may live in or must travel through on their way home from the Texas peyote gardens.
That there was a young man here just last week. He lives in Indiana. He's a member of our church, local chapter. He's got him an employment in Indiana. He asked me to send him a membership card because he's a member of our local chapter. And when I thought about it, I don't know whether Indiana they legalized this peyote in their state. To send this to him, I even sent him with some peyotes with him. If they catch him with that peyote on his person, I don't know what they will do to him. We would like to get in the 50 states of the United States where they could pass laws giving us privilege to even just go through their state with this peyote in our possession. We would be satisfied. If they don't have no way of saying this peyote is legal in their state, we'll be arrested.
Today our nation has a very serious drug abuse problem here in the United States, and it has led to what has been popularly called the drug war, in which our nation is taking all necessary steps to address this serious and debilitating national problem. However, the Native American Church's religious use of peyote is very remote and very far removed from our nation's drug war. It did not cause it. It did not contribute to it.
You go to any city in the country, and within 3 blocks of downtown, you can buy any kind of drug you want. But the average citizen would have to spend weeks or maybe months even locating a member of the Native American Church, let alone finding one that might have peyote on him at the time. So the situation, when you put it together, becomes surrealistic. And this is basically the term that dissenting justices on the Supreme Court are going to use more and more when you're talking about Indian cases, that you try and apply that other white man's law to it, and the results become totally absurd.
This substance, which within this religion is regarded as God's flesh, just in the way that bread is regarded as the flesh of Jesus and wine, the blood of Jesus. To speak of peyote as a narcotic is like speaking of the wine in the Eucharist, Christian Eucharist, as booze, calling it booze. There is about equal logic in both of these designations.
In 1977, Dr. Manuel Carrell worked as medical doctor and director of the drug dependency unit at the Indian Health Service Hospital in Winnebago, Nebraska.
When I came, I kind of thought peyote was a drug, a drug of abuse, and you weren't going to convince me otherwise. When I was there and I was in charge of their drug dependent unit, peyote was not a problem. Peyote wasn't what I was seeing as a problem. Winnebago is and was, at those times, fortunate to have the only drug-dependent unit in the entire Indian Health Service system. It wasn't just local Winnebago. They tracked the entire Aberdeen area, which, really, like half of America would be sent to the drug-dependent unit in Winnebago. And, of course, the drug that they were treating most of the time was alcohol, and sometimes other drugs. And I never saw a peyote problem.
Yo por eso de a veces les peleo que no es droga. Si fuera droga, entonces yo ya no estuviera. Desde cuando empecé a comer, pues antes me está dando vida, vida, vida. Hasta ahorita aquí vengo.
The Huichol Indians are a group of Indians that live in northwestern Mexico. And they use it regularly, and they have evolved a complex cultural life in relation to its use. They use it, so to speak, from the cradle to the grave. We used as our control a group of Huichol Indians who lived some miles away, who had similar habits to theirs, but did not use peyote. And we took blood from both the Huichol Indians that use peyote and the non-peyote users and compared them, and found that there was very little, almost no chromosomal damage in both of the groups, and that according to the local doctor who took care of the Indians, he did not feel that there was any increase in any unusual birth defects or any unusual medical defects as a consequence of using peyote.
I personally, as I said, from infancy have been using this divine medicine. I have never, ever had a hallucinatory experience. I have never used this medicine to try to attain a state of euphoria, which is just a glossy way of saying getting high. Never in my life. I have never known a Native American church person to be hallucinating or to use this other than to get into harmony with God, a means of becoming aware of God's creation.
When I've eaten the sacred sacrament of the Native American Church, it brings upon a real contemplative mood and great lucidity in thoughts. I'm able to literally project what I intend to do in the future. And with the sacrament as my guide, I'm able to think about good things, not only for myself, but for those that might benefit from the actions I intend to take. During a Native American church meeting, I thought about many of the problems facing our nation as Indian people. And I decided at that point that many of those problems were legal problems. And I wanted to obtain an education and learn about the law. So it was during that particular meeting that I thought about these issues that I decided to become a lawyer.
If we're praying for the healing of someone's sick body, or sick mind, or some emotional problem, or maybe we're gathered in celebration, maybe we're celebrating a marriage, a union, maybe we're celebrating the birth of a child. We want that child to live a long and happy life. Or maybe one of our young people is going off into the armed forces, and we want them to be safe and to fulfill their military obligations in an honorable way and come home to us in a good frame of mind and a good physical health.
I was a paratrooper and scuba diver in the First Force Recon Platoon at the tail end of Vietnam. It took me over there and it brought me back. I prayed with Creator God, take me over there and bring me back with nothing wrong with me. Give me an honorable discharge that I make my relatives, my clans, my people proud of me. And I won't forget this prayer. So today, it's been 21 years I've lived a life of sobriety.
It's very hypocritical at this point for me in terms of the Supreme Court decision that was made against our Native American church religion. I have a cousin who is college degreed. He's a very quiet man. He's not very old, but he has been brought up in this Native American church. And my cousin is one of the ones that served running the computers that had to do with the missiles that were being shot up in the air. And he had to, that was his job. For him to serve that way and to defend this country and to defend the right for us to pray, It's not right.
And I've also been sent to Saudi Arabia to take part in Operation Desert Shield / Desert Storm. One of the main reasons I joined the military was on behalf of not only my family and myself, was for this way of worship. I took an oath, and it states, "I'm an American fighting in the armed forces which protect our country and our way of life, and I am prepared to give my life in its defense." And I went all the way, and I laid my life on the line for that. So I think I deserved that right for this religion to go on the way we wanted to, undisturbed, with no outside interruptions.
Presidents Nixon and Kennedy both went on the record to support the sovereign rights of Native Americans. In 1970, President Nixon wrote, "The story of the Indian in America is something more than the record of the white man's frequent aggression, broken agreements, intermittent remorse, and prolonged failure. It is a record also of endurance, of survival, of adaptation and creativity in the face of overwhelming obstacles. It is a record of enormous contributions to this country, to its art and culture, to its strength and spirit, to its sense of history and its sense of purpose." President Kennedy wrote in 1963, "Before we can set out on the road to success, we have to know where we are going, and to do that we have to know where we have been in the past. It seems a basic requirement to study the history of Native American people. Only through this study can we as a nation do what must be done if our treatment of the Native American is not to be marked down for all time as a national disgrace."
In her opinion in the Smith case, Justice O'Connor expressed very deep concern about the majority's decision, which referred American Indians to Congress to obtain legislative protection for their human rights to worship. Her concern was that the very purpose of the First Amendment is to withhold certain basic rights such as religion, speech, freedom of association, freedom of conscience from the vagaries of the political process.
After Smith, there is a real and troublesome question about whether the free exercise clause has any real practical meaning in the law at all. When you need the First Amendment, it won't be there, or at least that is the way the Smith case has left the law.
When the United States Supreme Court handed down its decision in the Smith case in April of 1990, church leaders from all different churches around the country were shocked. No one expected the decision to be so far-reaching.
I have been keeping a record since April 17th of 1990 when the court decided this. And I think there are about 18 cases that have been controlled by Smith. In one of them, the Philadelphia Friends, the Quakers, some of their employees had conscientious objections to paying taxes for support of war. Judge Norma Shapiro in the Federal District Court in Philadelphia said, reluctantly, that since the Smith decision, she had to permit the Internal Revenue Service to compel the Friends to override their employees' consciences. And she added, it's ironic that in the state which William Penn founded to protect the consciences of Quakers, there is nothing in the state or federal constitution to protect the rights of conscience for the Quakers.
A prohibition law in a state could keep us from using wine for sacramental purposes. I suppose it could, hate to put ideas in anybody's head, but I suppose it could also do away with circumcision. I know that that it could be used, and I'll bet that we will see one coming down the pike pretty soon to do away with kosher slaughtering. There are just any number of things that can happen, but it can go all the way. It can go all the way to suppress and stifle, to the point almost of elimination, religion. It is a horrendous kind of a development.
The federal Congress can pass special Indian legislation, and it has in the past passed legislation dealing with religious freedom to give Christians access to Indian reservations. Treaties that say you cannot bring liquor on the reservation, Congress gives churches an exemption to bring wine on the reservation for communion services. So it's well within the power of Congress. We really can't lose because we have those reservation enclaves. The rest of the country can lose, and will lose drastically, every time they take an Indian case and rule against it, because what they're doing is tearing up their own Constitution in order to get at us.
As a member of the United States Senate, it does not please me at all to know that of the 800 treaties that were signed by Indian nations and the President of the United States, the Senate of the United States refused to act upon 430 of them. They just filed it away, although we insisted that the Indians live up to their agreements. And we ratified 370 of the treaties. But sadly, I must tell you that of the 370 treaties that the United States Senate ratified, the United States government violated provisions in every one of them.
The Supreme Court of the United States will not protect or will not grant the constitutional protection to Native American religious practices, will not protect their sacred sites, will not protect those things that are essential to their religion. Native Americans have exhausted their judicial remedies. Only the Congress can now act.
Indian country is hoping that Congress will pass omnibus legislation that will protect all aspects of endangered and threatened Native religious practices. We will be offering amendments to the 1978 Religious Freedom Act. With regard to the Peyote section of the bill, we would hope to secure legislation that would simply codify the pre-existing federal administrative practice of the DEA, which now and since the 1960s has provided for a religious exemption for Indian religious use of peyote.
Love, faith, hope, and charity. Those are the basic primeval laws that a human will need in order to survive. That is what Indian people believe is inherent in the power of this medicine.
We indigenous people live this way of life from the beginning of time. We talk the biblical times of Genesis, at the time when God created the earth. At that time, he also created this sacrament, this peyote that we use of the Native American church.
And a lot of people don't know that, so they said, well, that peyote's no good. But it's good for me. I lived this long, and I brought up all my children. I teach him how to put up teepees and make this fireplace. And I brought him up like that. And I don't see nothing wrong. I don't see nothing. They all have homes. They all have right mind. They all think good. They all have families. And I'm still here.
I see. Anne hitsodezen behones denigit ego. Do diginan hinda do zenan hinda hagit ego.
Someplace around here, when all the Indians got together before, not all of us spoke the same language, not all of us believed the same things, but we found a balance. Well, I say now that with all us Indians and with all those whites, not all of us think the same way, and maybe we don't speak the same language or practice the same religion, but we can get along.
Been a tool in this whole, I've been a pawn in this whole thing. I actually felt I've done nothing, really, other than just to validate the Native American Church and the sacred sacrament. You know.
And I feel like I would die for it. It's meant much to me in my life. My folks used it. You know, find spiritual guidance. Like I said, now I'm going to be 94 years of age, and all this life, if I would say, if there's a perfect example of a person using peyote all his life, well, I think I'm one of them. I've enjoyed it. I've prospered by it. I've lived a life of abundant life.
Well, one thing we have left, as I said, is our religion. And this is one thing those of us that are in the various leadership roles in this country, we want to try to stand up for these ways of our Indian people. And for the next 500 years, I hope with our prayers that this church will still be standing for our children, grandchildren, and those unborn.
Ofreciendo. Y tú ya le puedes decir, no, pues yo quiero agarrar este camino. El camino, el que es malo, también te puede decir, ese camino no sirve, y este camino no sirve, y mira, este camino es derecho.
So this is the road that we're journeying down. Some Indian traditions speak of the good red road. Some of us that have the belief say this is the Jesus road. Some refer to it as the Peyote Road. But the elder told us it's the road of life that we're walking. And in my language, we have a term. We say, "Ai kiduti." And that's what this road is all about, that we're supposed to be holding up one another, supporting each other, like having our arm underneath our brother's arm and walking down this road of life together.
In September of 1994, the United States Congress passed an amendment to the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. On October 6th, President Clinton signed the bill into law. This new legislation guarantees the right of American Indians to use the sacrament peyote in traditional religious ceremonies throughout the United States, It also prohibits discrimination for such use and provides for legal procurement and transportation of peyote for members of the Native American Church. It is remarkable that this ancient and humble religion was able to overcome the devastation of the Supreme Court's decision and create the legislative protections necessary to ensure that this way of life and prayer will be passed on to future generations. On June 28, 1993, 6 months after the completion of this program, the executive producer of the Peyote Road, Reuben A. Snake, Jr., passed away. In spite of his ailing health, Reuben spent the final years of his life working to secure legislation to protect the Native American Church way of life. Reuben will be remembered for his humor, his wisdom, and his dedication to Indian people of many nations. This has been a Kifaro production.